My name is Colin Clements. I'm the DSL at Bristol Brunel Academy. I've worked there for 14 years. I've been DSL for about 4 or so years. We've got 1,350 students, and I want to talk a little bit about how a really large safeguarding team helps us, helps us, the young people, and ourselves as professionals, and hopefully some of the successes of that system. So we've got 19 staff that are trained to DSL level in the school, and then we've also got 9 staff who are advanced practitioner level trained. So there's a high number of staff that can deal with some high-end safeguarding concerns. So we'll think about that in relation to child sexual abuse. I'm going to talk very broadly, and it'll be around, we consider child-on-child incidents online, in person, as well as things that aren't child-on-child as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we may identify students, how we may respond, and then some few things about being victim-based. I'm not a trained teacher, and teachers, when they learn to teach, they spend about a year learning how to do PowerPoints really effectively, really quickly. I'm not a qualified teacher, so this is the best I could do. But you'll just see that we've got a high number of staff with safeguarding responsibility in each year group who know the young people. And then apart from that, we've also got a special behaviour kind of resource within the school to support our more vulnerable students and whose behaviour might be more challenging. And those staff, we've got a number of staff there who are DSL trained, as well as our designated teacher being DSL trained for that cohort too, for our looked after children. So how do we identify students? Well, we can't predict when we're going to receive a disclosure or a report. We can't do that. We don't know where it's going to come from. I've just got some examples there of some situations kind of over the last couple of years where we've been made aware of an incident of sexual abuse, and that might be a phone call coming from a local business of something they've witnessed. Quite commonly a friend of a student has supported someone to come along, maybe a parent. Quite a profound one where a student was in a conversation around a book they were reading in tutor, and there was a conversation about consent in the tutor, and then they came forward afterwards having reflected on an experience they'd had. Perhaps we see a behaviour change, perhaps we get an anonymous disclosure. These all kind of feed into each other in terms of identifying, responding, and being victim-based, because we're always going to reflect on how we get some information about how we do something differently in the future. We talk a lot about behaviour change in school, about witnessing that, and I think especially in a secondary school, our large capacity to receive safeguarding reports hopefully means that there's staff who know those students everywhere. They interact with so many adults in a secondary school, that it's really key that there are staff that know them, a number of staff that do know those students to notice those changes. In terms of responding, I would say, actually going back to identifying as well, proactively, the capacity means that if a student does come forward or we do get a report, it does mean that the staff has got the kind of the skills and the training, the experience to be able to kind of proceed with the situation, instead of being in a situation where they're maybe going, okay, we're going to go along and introduce you to the DSL who you've never spoken to before, and you can talk to them about it. So it does give us the ability to react quicker to those things. We also, there are some proactive aspects where we do monitor, with a vulnerable student cohort via looking at kind of behaviour logs, cross-referencing behaviour logs, attendance, and maybe where we've received those police notifications and such like. In terms of responding, obviously this will just completely depend on the situation. The first thing is always going to be, really, once we have enough information to know enough about a situation, we just then immediately want to know who's the expert here, who can hold this risk, who can hold this information, who's going to be the best person to advise us. And it's also really important to consider who needs support in that situation. So a young person will need support in that situation, that young person's friends. There might be an online element as well. There's going to be consideration for all of those aspects, and there's going to be a need for some immediate response. as well as working then towards, as fast as possible, having these conversations with home and putting support in for home. And again, that larger capacity means you're not waiting for the availability of a small number of staff to have this conversation with a parent. It means that can hopefully happen as quickly as possible. And responding with like, who can advise, those sorts of things. Then beyond that, there's always a wider response. So that would be potentially looking at our PSHE curriculum. So there might be certain situations or certain trends we might hear or we might see, where then we can go back to our PSHE team and say, can we have a lesson on, say for instance, consent? If we realise that perhaps this could come in a little bit sooner, a year 7 getting information on consent, a year 8 getting enough information on consent, let's do a reactive lesson, etc. to find to put that in. We also work really hard to make a really inclusive academy, being aware as a barrier to disclosure. Some students might not feel safe in coming forward if they feel they've got to discuss a part of their identity, which they might not think members of staff might not be sympathetic to or like fully kind of aware of their kind of lived experience. So for instance, we've got a large LGBTQ plus group that attends weekly, where students there will feel more confident in reporting that concern. We also will put up posters around the academy. So for instance, in terms of online, we're not going to tell students not to use, if they've experienced harm online, it's not a case of don't go online, but we've put up posters around kind of positive social media accounts to follow, and we tie that in with Pride Month, with ability of disability kind of week and such. And then off the back of that, just seeing that kind of staff training, we're always reviewing how a situation has unfolded, and if there's more information, we need to go back to staff. I'd just say that the guidance we have kind of linked to the pathway around talking to parents is really key, and I find that really powerful, and that's something that we've shared across the team. And then I think it's some of the changes that we've had over the last few years, and this would be from having conversations with like Stephen and I have spoken, and conversations with Henry, would be about how we are able to become less risk averse in supporting young people, and getting the right information from the right professionals. I spoke about which experts do you want to talk to. Well, it's about speaking to those experts so you know what to look out for in behaviour. We're supporting all our young people, and it make us feel confident in supporting those young people going forward. And then finally, just a few things around being victim focused that hopefully are things that we kind of like hammer into each other day in day out in the school. If someone's experienced crime, if someone's been made into a victim, that's the removal of agency. So as much as possible, as soon as possible, we want to support that person in having their agency back and having their decision-making power back. And the kind of clearest example of that is if someone has experienced some kind of harm, and this applies to anything, that young person shouldn't have to change their behaviour off the result of that. So it might be something's happened in a classroom, and this applies to an unkind comment as much as it applies to anything else. If a young person has experienced an unkind comment in the classroom and they've expressed that concern, don't move that child. Move someone who has harmed them if someone has to move, or if someone has to change classes or change seating plan, even down to that in the class. Let's support that young person to feel in control and that they don't feel victim blamed. Going back again to our to the wide safeguarding team, and the size of the team really helps us to have these positive relationships with young people and families. So if a young person, if we are aware of that they've experienced harm, they are in a situation, and their family, where they will be talking to a member of staff at the school that they already know, and they can feel supported, and they can feel that a conversation is coming from the right place, and that they already feel known to them. It's not a new person they're meeting. It's not getting a phone call from someone they've never spoken to before. And I've got a colleague, at work, Sarah, who is absolutely fantastic at some of these conversations which might be quite difficult with families, and this will apply as much to a family where a child of theirs has been harmed, or a family where their child has harmed someone else. And I remember asking her once, I said, Sarah, how do you have these conversations where families feel so supported, even though what you might have had, the conversation you might have had might have been quite a negative conversation? And she says, you meet them where they're at, not where you think they should be. And I just find that really powerful. And and just as a thing to always remember before we go into those conversations, just listen, sit with where they are, and then give them what they need to move them along on that journey. And then just finally, just relate to the language. We're talking about a child that's harmed another child. I remember speaking to Henry about, again, trying to manage this risk and support this young person back into the school. And I spoke to Henry on the phone and I said, how do I risk assess the child being back in the building? How do I risk assess this child coming back in? And Henry just said, well, you don't. You safety plan to protect them from allegations. And it just flips it. And actually, instead of having that conversation with a parent where we're saying, your child needs to be risk assessed, we're saying we're going to safety plan them so they're supported going forward and they're not going to experience future allegations, the reputational damage that comes to that sort of thing, and you can safety plan them forward. And that really helps to get those families on board and those young people on board, because that's an open conversation that you can have with them. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. But yeah, thanks for having me. Good time.